Thomas woke up early, the quiet house heavy with the absence of his wife, Amanda. She had been away for weeks on a business trip, and it felt like the world had been on pause without her. As he tried to shake off the early morning fog, his mind kept circling around two things: the tasks he had to complete that day, and the thought of Amanda coming home. He hadn't seen her in so long, and he wanted her return to be perfect. He started by making coffee. The rich scent filled the air, grounding him. He cleaned up, arranging the living room and folding Amanda's favorite blanket neatly on the armchair. It was small, but it was something he knew she would appreciate. When the front door finally creaked open, the sunlight poured in, casting a golden glow over Amanda as she stepped inside. Her smile, though tired, was warm, and Thomas couldn't hold back. He moved toward her and wrapped his arms around her, whispering, "Welcome home, Amanda." She leaned into him, her exhaustion giving way to contentment. For a brief moment, everything felt right again. But then, just as the embrace lingered, Amanda pulled back and reached into her bag. With a sly smile, she extended a small white stick toward him. "I have news," she said, her voice filled with excitement. As she revealed the truth, that she was pregnant, Thomas stood frozen. His mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. Could this really be happening? Thomas stared at the pregnancy test in Amanda's hand, his mind scrambling to catch up with the reality unfolding in front of him. He looked at her beaming face, trying to make sense of the words she had just said. "Are you serious?" he stammered, his voice shaky as he reached for her hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he took the test from her. This was incredible, but at the same time, it was overwhelming. Amanda laughed, a tear slipping down her cheek as she nodded. "Yes, we're going to be parents. Isn't it amazing?" Her joy was contagious, but even as she kissed him lightly and squeezed his hand, a small knot of unease began to twist inside him. He hadn't expected this. His thoughts started to spiral. They'd been distant before her trip, hadn't they? It felt like something had been missing between them, and now this news was turning his world upside down. But Amanda laughed it off, assuring him that life had a way of surprising you, even if the timing seemed strange. She promised she'd make a doctor's appointment to confirm everything, and Thomas tried to calm his nerves. But the doubt still lingered. As he went through his day, on his commute, at work, answering emails, he found it impossible to focus. His mind kept returning to the moment he had just shared with Amanda. There were so many memories flooding back, but there was also a strange feeling he couldn't shake. He thought about the night they met, at a celebration after his promotion. The party was full of colleagues, but Amanda stood out, laughing with Jason Palmer, one of his fiercest rivals. Thomas had watched from across the room as Jason's hand rested too familiarly on Amanda's arm. The rivalry between him and Jason had always been tense, but it only spurred Thomas on. He joined the conversation, charming Amanda with his wit, and before long, Jason had excused himself, leaving Thomas the opportunity to get closer to her. Their connection was instant. A year later, Thomas had proposed under the stars on a beach, and Amanda's smile had been all the confirmation he needed. They married quickly, their home filled with love, laughter, and dreams for the future. But now, with the news of the pregnancy, a quiet anxiety crept in. Could this be real? Was this their next chapter, or was something off? He wanted to embrace the joy, to celebrate this new step, but doubt clouded his mind. Later that evening, Amanda set the stage for a romantic dinner, candles flickering softly and their favorite food filling the air with warmth. They ate, laughed, and shared stories. Her happiness seemed endless. As they moved upstairs, her reassurances calmed him for a time. For a moment, he let himself believe everything was going to be okay. But just 2 days later, Amanda returned from her doctor's appointment, and her news hit Thomas like a punch to the stomach. "I'm about 4 weeks along," she said, her voice still full of excitement. 4 weeks. Thomas's heart sank. He did the math in his head, his mind racing. They hadn't been intimate during that time. Something didn't add up. Tentatively, he asked her about it. Amanda brushed him off with a light laugh. "You must have forgotten," she said, confident but oddly rehearsed. She insisted everything was fine. But Thomas couldn't ignore the discomfort building inside him. Her explanation didn't feel genuine, and the nagging feeling that something was off grew stronger. Torn between his love for Amanda and his growing suspicion, Thomas wrestled with what he feared was the truth. Could Amanda be hiding something from him? As the days passed, Thomas's unease only deepened. He began to notice a physical discomfort as well, an irritation in his groin that wouldn't go away. He tried to ignore it, but it gnawed at him. Secretly, he saw a doctor, keeping it from Amanda. The test results were devastating. Thomas had contracted an STD. The news shattered the last of his illusions. He had to confront the terrifying possibility that Amanda had been unfaithful. His suspicions were no longer just doubts, they were undeniable facts. Determined to get answers, Thomas started to investigate. He looked through Amanda's laptop when she wasn't home, combing through emails and business trip documents. That's when he saw it. Jason Palmer's name. Amanda had joined a new company, but Thomas hadn't realized Jason was involved in her professional world again. Seeing Jason's name on the travel list triggered memories of their past. Jason's arrogance, their rivalry, and his familiar touch when he'd spoken to Amanda. Thomas couldn't shake the thought, was this Jason's revenge? Had Amanda been drawn back into his orbit, and was this pregnancy part of some scheme? The more Thomas thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit together. Amanda and Jason's connection might have been more than just business. Was Amanda using the pregnancy to manipulate him? Was she planning to secure financial gain, even if it meant lying about the baby's paternity? It was a thought that horrified him, but he couldn't shake it. He needed to act. To protect himself. He turned to Ellen, a sharp lawyer, and a financial advisor for help. They outlined a plan to safeguard his assets, and it was clear to Thomas. He needed to cover his tracks before Amanda could do any damage. First, he set up a trust fund to protect his major assets. His house, his retirement savings, everything needed to be safe. The lawyer advised him to move his savings to offshore accounts in places where privacy laws were strict. And to make things even more complicated for Amanda, he took out a loan against the house, lowering its value to make it less appealing in a potential divorce settlement. But that wasn't all. He needed proof. Thomas started documenting Amanda's actions, saving her communications, and gathering evidence. Everything he could use if it came to a court battle. Then, he hired a private investigator, David, to follow Amanda and Jason. Despite their attempts to be discreet, David captured subtle but telling moments, a private lunch, lingering glances, and quiet conversations at a cafe. The photos and videos weren't obvious, but they suggested more than a professional relationship between Amanda and Jason. With the evidence in hand, Thomas moved forward. He finalized his divorce papers, making sure his assets were protected, and packed up his things. He didn't want Amanda to know what was coming. As Thomas left the life he had built with Amanda behind, he relocated to a secluded hotel in the countryside. He didn't look back, preparing for the fallout from the divorce, knowing he had done everything he could to protect himself. Meanwhile, Amanda returned from her trip, only to find her world shattered. On the kitchen counter was an envelope. Inside, the divorce papers, signed and sealed. Thomas had disappeared, and there was nothing she could do to change it. Amanda stood frozen in the doorway, the envelope in her trembling hands. Her heart raced as she stared at the divorce papers in disbelief. The world around her seemed to blur. She thought of everything they'd built together, the late-night talks, their shared laughter, their plans for the future. How had everything crumbled so quickly? Her eyes stung with tears as she dropped the envelope onto the kitchen counter, her mind racing. Thomas. What had happened? She had thought they were happy. She had convinced herself that their love was strong, that they could weather anything. But this was a blow she hadn't seen coming. The room seemed to close in around her, and for the first time, Amanda wondered if her life had been nothing but lies. She thought back to those few weeks when everything had seemed off between them. She knew something had been wrong, but she never thought Thomas would walk away from her so suddenly. The pregnancy, the trips, her relationship with Jason, it all felt like it had spiraled out of control. Her hand shook as she reached for her phone. She needed to call him. She needed answers. But deep down, she already knew. Thomas had found out. He knew about her affair with Jason. The thought made her stomach churn. How could she have been so reckless? How could she have let it all spiral so far? The guilt hit her like a tidal wave. She couldn't breathe. She had betrayed the one person who had always been there for her. The person she had promised to build a life with. And now, she was left with nothing but a pile of broken dreams and the harsh reality of her own mistakes. The phone rang in her hand, But she hesitated. She had no idea what to say to him. No idea how to explain what had happened, or how she could ever make things right. But there was no escaping it. Finally, she pressed his number, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for him to pick up. When the phone clicked, and his cold voice greeted her, it shattered whatever resolve she had left. "Thomas." Her voice cracked. There was a long pause. "Amanda. I think you know why I'm doing this." His words were sharp, but they felt distant, like he was already gone. And in some ways, he was. Her silence spoke volumes. She could barely find the words. Everything she had wanted to say was swallowed by the weight of her guilt. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered, the tears threatening to fall. "You should have thought about that before you crossed the line, Amanda," Thomas responded coldly. There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. It was as if the last thread of connection between them had snapped. Amanda's chest tightened. She tried to speak, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but Thomas cut her off before she could say another word. "I'm done, Amanda. I don't know how you're going to fix this, but I can't be part of it anymore." The line went dead. Amanda dropped the phone onto the kitchen counter, the echo of his words still ringing in her ears. She sank to her knees, her body shaking with a mix of regret and disbelief. She had lost everything. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, and it was Jason. A wave of anger and frustration surged through her. Jason, the one who had gotten her into this mess. The one who had manipulated her, used her, and now, it seemed, he was trying to salvage whatever he could from the wreckage. She answered the call, but before she could speak, Jason's voice came through, sounding urgent. "Amanda, we need to talk. I've got something important to tell you." Her heart sank further. "What is it, Jason?" "I'm not sure how to say this," Jason started, his voice low. "But you need to know something. I didn't just do this because of the affair. I never wanted things to go this far." Her pulse quickened. What was he talking about? "There's something you don't know, something Thomas found out," Jason continued. "I didn't just get you into this mess. I think you've been played. Played by someone much bigger than either of us." Amanda felt a cold chill wash over her. What did he mean? "Thomas didn't just find out about us, Amanda," Jason said, his voice urgent now. "He's been working on this for a while. He knew what was happening, and I'm afraid you've been a pawn in something much larger." Amanda felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, barely able to speak. "Thomas has been making plans behind your back," Jason's voice softened, now tinged with fear. "I think he's been setting up his exit strategy for months. The pregnancy, the affair, it's all part of the game. He's been covering his tracks, manipulating the situation. And he's using everything you've done against you." Amanda's heart raced. Could it be true? Was she really being used in some twisted plan? Could Thomas have been plotting his escape from the start? Jason continued, "I don't know how deep this goes, but if you don't act fast, you might lose everything. Your reputation, your finances, everything. I think he's already got a lawyer involved, and he's already making moves." The weight of Jason's words hit her like a freight train. Her mind was spinning. Could Thomas really be that cold? Was she just a pawn in his scheme? Or was Jason trying to manipulate her, too? "I don't know what to believe anymore," Amanda murmured, her voice barely audible. Jason was silent for a long moment, before finally speaking. "I think you should get legal advice. I don't trust what's going on, but I think you need to fight for what's yours." Amanda was left in a haze, the last shred of hope slipping through her fingers. She knew her world had just exploded, but now she had to make a choice. Fight for what she thought was hers or walk away and let the consequences consume her. What happened next would decide the rest of her life. Amanda sat in silence, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The phone call with Jason echoed in her mind, a bitter reminder of how far she had fallen. She had spent so much time thinking she could control everything, her marriage, her choices, her future, but now all of it seemed out of reach. Her mind kept replaying the moments she had with Thomas. The way he used to look at her, the small gestures of affection, the shared dreams. But those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else. She had broken something that couldn't be fixed. And Thomas? He was already gone, detached, moving on with his own plan. The thought of legal battles, public humiliation, and the inevitable fallout was overwhelming. Yet, deep down, Amanda knew she couldn't sit back and let everything fall apart without fighting. She had made mistakes, yes, but she wasn't ready to lose everything without a fight. The road ahead was uncertain, and every choice felt like a gamble. But she had one thing left, the will to take control, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about herself. She wiped away the tears that had been threatening to spill and stood up, taking a long breath. There was still time to act. Her first step was clear: find a lawyer. Amanda knew that she couldn't trust Jason's word alone. She needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. Was Thomas truly manipulating her, or was Jason playing her just as much? She couldn't afford to be blind to the truth anymore. If she wanted any chance of salvaging something from the wreckage, she had to start by gaining clarity. The room felt less suffocating now. Amanda felt a spark of determination. This wasn't the end, not yet. She may have lost Thomas, but there was still the chance to rebuild her life, her reputation, and her future. The fight wasn't over. She grabbed her purse and walked out the door, heading straight for a lawyer's office. Whatever happened next, she was done waiting. She was done hiding from her own mistakes. If she had any chance of turning things around, it had to start with taking responsibility and facing the truth head-on. And maybe, just maybe, it could also mean reclaiming the pieces of herself that had been lost in the chaos. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content like this.